the necessity for quick burial. The next stage commences when the skin of the corpse is ruptured, which allows the gases to escape and the carcass to deflate again. In this decay stage, the larvae or maggots of flies proliferate in large numbers and consume much of the soft tissues. Predators such as wasps, ants, and beetles also arrive to feed on the fly larvae. In the following stage, only cartilage, skin, and bones remain, and different groups of flies and beetles plus their respective parasites take over the decomposition process. Finally, only bones and hair remain, and they can persist for several years or more, although even they are consumed. For example, mice and voles will gnaw on old bones to obtain the calcium they contain. The progression through these stages depends to some extent on the time of year when death occurs, but typically it will take several months from beginning to end. Something that didn't happen with so many of these animals that are found intact. With many of the fossils of maritime life, it's just as if they had been trapped immediately in the limestone. Evolution theory holds that the American mastodon roamed North America from 3 million to 10,000 years ago, according to this museum display. But the state of Florida has disproved this dating. What about carbon-14? This isotope is useful only for dating organic remains that are not very old, geologically speaking. With a half-life of only 57-30 years, it is difficult to measure carbon-14 in material older than about 40,000 to 60,000 years. This is Florida speaking. There is absolutely no scientific basis for these 1 million, 3 million year ages for the fossils. So any time that these believers in the evolution community dream and pray that a fossil might be older than 50,000 years, they're just pulling their numbers out of thin air. But what does it mean when they say a fossil is 10,000 years old? As soon as a living organism dies, it stops taking in new carbon. The ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-14 at the moment of death is the same as every other living thing, but the carbon-14 decays and is not replaced. The carbon-14 decays with its half-life of 5,700 years, while the amount of carbon-12 remains constant in the sample. By looking at the ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-14 in the sample and comparing it to the ratio in a living organism, it is possible to determine the age of a formerly living thing fairly precisely. They say, except for that the assumption that carbon-14 has always decayed at a constant rate has no scientific basis. That might be the rate that it's been decaying in the last 50 to 70 years since this method was first studied. However, various events could have taken place years ago which would alter the rate of decay. Another thing is that they assume that the percentage of carbon-14 in a living organism 3,000 years ago is just the same as it would be today, and there's no scientific basis for that assumption. One key reason for the confusion, authors say, is that specimen contamination has rendered decades of carbon-14 dating research potentially inaccurate. It's a concern, said Yukon paleontologist Grant Zazula, lead author of the study. A lot of the radiocarbon dates that are out there in the literature are probably problematic. This is the prestige and majesty of the Yukon Territory in Canada. Their territorial, provincial lead paleontologist says those carbon-14 datings are problematic. 10,000, 15,000, 1 million, 2 million, whatever. Oftentimes the samples are contaminated, say the experts. And if their testing doesn't work for some reason, they use the term "it makes sense." After eliminating these sources of contamination, the researchers found that all of the high latitude fossils were older than the limits of carbon-14 dating, or more than 50,000 years old. Zazula said that although the researchers were unable to directly date the fossils, it made the most ecological sense that they were at least 75,000 years old. And that's an honest paleontologist. He admits there's no scientific basis for these big numbers, but it made sense to him. He believes. He has faith. How do they determine their half-life? Just because carbon-14 decays at a certain rate today, there's no guarantee the decay rate has been constant over thousands, let alone millions of years. And sometimes when the exact age is known in advance, the bones of a saber-toothed tiger, theorized to be between 100,000 and 1 million years old, gave a carbon date of 28,000 years. A freshly killed seal, dated using carbon-14, showed it had died 1,300 years ago. Living mollusk shells were dated up to 2,300 years old. Some very unusual evidence is that living snail shells showed that they had died 27,000 years ago. The scientific community agrees that this carbon-14 dating often yields inaccurate results, so it might be interesting to see that someone tried to measure the carbon-14 levels in a sample, but it really doesn't mean that they determine anything with certainty concerning the age of a specimen. The Yukon government expert says most of the carbon-14 dating results in the literature are suspect, and guesses when the tests don't work out for him, based on assumptions that may or not be true. So what exactly has Florida proven? The conjecture that mastodons got rolling 3 million years ago lacks any basis in science. Just like the rest of millions and billions numbers used to make life sound really old. So that special events like when that fish comes out of water and becomes a man are so far back in time that there are no witnesses and no surviving proof. That's their problem. They have some pretty fantastical theories, totally imaginative, and they say, well, this fish got up and started walking, or it might be that the first two beings were a man and a woman. They came together in love, and 9 months later the woman gave birth to a pine tree. The next baby was a tomato plant. Unbelievable. So they say, we don't know exactly how it happened. We have no pictures, no nothing. All happened so far back. But does it ever happen in our day? No, it never does. These days people have too many video cameras and still cameras and whatnot. If something like that actually was happening, you'd be able to see it on YouTube. It's just fairy tales. So those evolutionists just have their faith, and not a shred of evidence to support it.